Hello, welcome to Vlog Friday. I cannot believe you're joining me for part 4 of Getting to Moscow, Fall 1991. Daryl and I just finished our week-long conference. Daryl works for Forum of Christian Leaders out of Chicago, and he's the vice president of European Leadership Forum, and they have their conference every year during May in Wisla, Poland. And this year we weren't able, of course, to have the conference, so we did everything online. It was wonderful. We had nearly 3,000 participants from over 100 countries, and we heard great speakers like Oz Guinness and John Lennox and J.P. Moreland. So it was a really wonderful time, and I felt so encouraged, and Daryl did a great job on his workshops and sessions as well. But thanks so much for joining me. I'm a little bit tired, but I want to finish the Moscow Fall 1991 story. So please be patient with me today. It's going to take a little bit longer, I think, than normal, but I want to finish it out. And there's so many fantastic details. I just want to give God the glory for every bit and piece of it. So, as you recall, I had my ticket purchased for August 27, 1991. I'd gotten my long-term visa from Chicago for teaching in Moscow. There's not an embassy, but I think it's called a consulate up there for what was then the USSR. So I had my long-term visa in hand. I was getting almost two times, maybe 3 times a month, some kind of correspondence from my university through registered mail, or they would send me a wire. And so I felt really comfortable about everything. And I was getting my suitcases packed, taking all the cleaning supplies and contact paper and bug killer and everything I needed to make life comfortable for me in the profilactory. Always crack up at that name, profilactory. Preventive medicine. I think that's what it's called. So I'm getting ready to go, and there's a sign of kind of a movement in Moscow that it's taking everybody by surprise. You have to remember, I prayed over Russia in 1986 and 1988, riding the Trans-Siberian Railroad both ways. And being able to pray and ask God to tear down the strongholds and to free the people of Russia and the Soviet Union, and that the Spirit of the Lord would move. And then when we start seeing some upheaval of the Communist Party, everyone's kind of in shock. And I was watching CNN 24 hours a day. I mean, I almost didn't sleep trying to figure out what was going on. Now, one of the things I did before I left Oklahoma, knowing that I was going to be going to Russia to teach, I joined an organization. I felt it was so important because I didn't have teammates or anybody going with me, but I wanted accountability. I wanted spiritual accountability. I wanted professional accountability. I just wanted to belong, what I would call a covering. And so I had joined this organization that sent teachers to China. I'd actually done some training for them a few years ago before this. And so I asked them, could I be your teacher in Moscow? And they said, yeah, that'd be great. We don't know anything about it. You have to do all the homework. We'll be praying for you. Consider us your accountability partners, but we don't know anything about Russia. But we had investigated ways for me to teach in Russia, and through an InterVarsity magazine, I'd seen an ad for an organization called International Institute for Christian Studies. And the role of that Christian organization, was to place Christian professors in secular universities outside of North America. So I had called them to see, because I saw they were placing professors in Moscow, and I'd called them to see, and I talked to this man named Daryl McCarthy, and I said, I would like to go and teach in Moscow, but they only hired PhDs, and I didn't have my PhD at that time. But he was telling me about what they were planning, and this was maybe in May, and he was talking to me about what they were planning and how many professors they would have in Moscow, and that he'd be happy to give me their contact information in case I felt lost or alone. You know, I could be a kind of unofficial team member of his crew that was going to teach in Moscow fall 1991. And this man seemed, knowledgeable. He'd traveled to the USSR several times. He'd done all the contract negotiation for these professors. So I felt very confident in his knowledge. Also, he never ended a phone conversation that he didn't pray for me and ask God to guide me and lead me. And I thought that was really amazing for someone who led a large organization to take time and pray for me, because I'd met a lot of people who were in charge of things that were supposedly Christian, and they weren't very nice, weren't very polite. So that was impressive. So we're getting ready to go. I had my airplane ticket paid for. I had a little bit of cash stashed away to kind of get me going when I got there. I had my suitcases packed. My visas were ready. People were praying for me. It just looked like a go all the way around. Now, my dad wasn't thrilled with it, but the wheels were already turning, and I think it was really, really impossible for him to even think about how to stop this. He was uncomfortable with sending his 30-year-old daughter to go live alone in the USSR. So we're watching this upheaval in Moscow. And as you might recall, on August 18, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the president of the USSR and head of the Communist Party, he was put under house arrest as the people's voices were being heard. And then by August 19, the next day, Boris Yeltsin, who was going to represent the new republic, was riding a tank in the city of Moscow. And the Moscow, or the Russian White House, was burning. So there was a lot of upheaval and unknown and uncertainties. And so I called my organization in Oklahoma and I said, hey guys, my dad just wanted me to check in with you. I'm still planning on going, but I just want to know, what do you think about what's taking place there? Because, August 27 is getting closer and closer. And there was the 20th and it was looking really bad. And 21st, the White House was burning. I'm just starting to get closer and closer to departure, and I didn't have any guidance, and I just needed to know, do I go? God told me I was supposed to be there fall 1991. I felt like he'd given me the clear date, and here it was looking like a mess. And so my organization in Oklahoma said, do you remember the guy in Kansas City who's sending his professors? And I said, yeah. And they go, why don't you call him? And whatever he's doing, you do that. You follow his lead and his direction. And I go, okay, fair enough. So I call Dr. Daryl McCarthy in Kansas City, and I said, I'm getting ready to go, to Moscow, because I had told him I'd gotten my own contract. And he said, well, I don't think anybody's going anywhere. And I said, well, God had given me a real sense of direction and a real peace, and this has been something that's been in my heart for a long time, that I was going to be in Moscow fall 1991. And he says, you know what your problem is? Why do men ever say that sentence? It's like the most rude, horrible sentence. Do you know what your problem is? No, why don't you tell me? And he says, your problem is that you're way too subjective. Everybody knows that history repeats itself. No Christian teachers are going to Moscow this fall. There's going to be a bloodbath, and you need to emotionally prepare yourself for that, because unfortunately, what you feel like God's told you, we've got some facts that are now speaking into that situation. And like I said, history repeats itself. It's going to be a bloodbath, and you're not going to Moscow on August 27. I'm sorry. Let me pray for you. So I got off the phone and I was like, whatever. I knew I was going. I had a peace that I was going. So it's like August 25th. And my dad comes downstairs, because I'm living in my parents' basement, before I go to Moscow. And my dad comes down and he goes, Terry, you're not going to go. It's not going to happen. And I said, why? Because no flights weren't canceled and my university hadn't canceled. So I was going to keep moving forward. And my dad said, well, actually, I forbid you. I forbid you to go. And I don't know what your belief system is. My belief system, and maybe I'm too, Gothard's basic youth conflict. If you know what that is, you know what I'm talking about. So I said, look, Dad, I will surrender to you. I will submit to you. You are the authority. You're the priest of this household. You're the authority over me as a single woman. I want to stay under your umbrella. And I will do whatever you tell me to do, because I think God is honored, because he tells me in the 10 Commandments, honor your mother and father. So you tell me not to go, and I will not go. You forbid it, I won't fight you on it. But I will tell you this. One day, Dad, you and I are going to stand before the judgment seat of Jesus. And Jesus is going to say, Terry, why didn't you go to Moscow like I told you to? And I'm going to say, because I wanted to obey my dad and honor him. Then Jesus is going to look at you, Dad, and he's going to say, why didn't you let her go? So you better know that this is from God, and you better know that you're forbidding me is God's will or not God's will. But I hope that you're hearing from the Lord, because I'm obeying you, and you're going to have to answer to the Lord for it. So my dad went upstairs and he prayed for like 4 hours. And in all my life, I'd never seen my dad. My dad had a very complicated relationship with God, and that's a whole nother story. But I knew that he loved me, and I knew that he wanted God's will to be done in my life. My dad had a reverence for God and a respect for God, though he struggled with obedience to the Lord. So after about 4 hours, I was just sitting down in the basement in my room, praying, crying a little bit, trying to figure things out. And my dad came down and knocked on the door, and I opened it, and he said, I've been spending time with the Lord, and this is what I know. I would rather you die in the center of God's will than to live safely outside it. You do what you believe the Lord is calling you to do. So, August 27 came, but here's the good news. Excuse me. By the 26th of August, it had all stopped. It was, I don't know that anyone was even killed. I'd have to Google that up. But I remember there was no bloodbath, and there was no big war or battle, and the people were rejoicing, and things were peaceful enough that I wasn't afraid, and nobody was afraid. So my mom drove me to Kansas City to catch my flight, and I had forgotten to get the information from Daryl McCarthy for his professors, the IICS professors, because he said they weren't going. So I called him from Kansas City, where he's located, and said, I need that information. And he goes, okay, I just want to tell you, you were right, and I was wrong about the bloodbath. But anyway, he gave me great information, some contact information for people, so that I wouldn't be totally isolated and alone without some kind of Christian American fellowship there. So I flew into Moscow with my 3 big heavy suitcases, and there to meet me were Natasha and Gerig. And Natasha and Gerig were married. He was from Georgia. She was from Russia. They'd met at Moscow State University. She was a professor at my university and had asked if she could be my host for my time of trying to transition. She and Gerig met me. They were adorable. They picked me up in their Lada, and we drove to their apartment, and she said, Teresa, I cannot bear you being in Profilactory alone. So you stay with me and Gerig. We will feed you. You can rest there. She had 2 boys, Misha and Daniel. And I got there, and they fed me and loved on me and gave me such a wonderful reception. And I stayed with them about 4 days, slept a lot. And then it was time for me to go to the Profilactory. And when it was time to go, Natasha just cried when she saw the room. And I said, now, Natasha, don't be afraid. I brought lots of cleaning supplies. I brought bug spray. I brought everything that I need to make this place my own. And so she and Gerig left me there, and I got to work scrubbing and cleaning and putting up contact paper and spraying for bugs. And my brother-in-law had suggested I take some wide packing tape and tape up all of the doors and windows and anything that led to the outside to keep the cockroaches out, because they were plentiful. Millions and millions of them. So I got the place situated, and it was time to start class. It was starting in just a few days. But I was a little bit nervous. I wanted to go to the International Church. I wanted to meet some people there. But how was I going to get there? I was trying to find a way to go. I found a map, but I don't know distances, and I'm not good at reading maps. So on Saturday, I decided to go walk in Gorky Park. Gorky Park was just across the street from the Profilactory. So I decided to go walk in Gorky Park. And it was a beautiful fall Saturday. It was crisp. The leaves were turning there. It was so nice. People were out walking their children, walking their dogs. And I saw the amphitheater in the center of Gorky Park was being set up for a concert. And so I was walking around and looking at people, and I noticed the trucks that were bringing the equipment had some English words. And I was thinking, I wonder what kind of concert this is going to be. Is it free? I was looking for someone who could speak English and was asking, is this concert free? It's free. No charge, no charge. So I waited and they set up the concert. And you are not going to believe it was Larnell Harris. The gospel singer, Larnell Harris. So I'm standing in the middle of Moscow with a population of 13 million people. I am standing in Gorky Park. I've only been in town about 4 or 5 days. I'm standing in the middle of Gorky Park watching Larnell Harris sing the praises to the Lord and praising God. And the crowd went wild. I mean, it was packed. And they had to move the chair so people could get even closer to the stage. And he sang his heart out. It was so surreal. And I looked up at the stage and I go, Larnell Harris, I'm from America. And he goes, what are you doing here? It was just the most bizarre, unbelievable experience. Then when I was leaving the concert and he sang, about 2.5 hours, he gave his heart to the music. It was beautiful. So I'm leaving the concert and an American couple comes to me and says, so you're from America? And I go, yes, I'm the loud woman that would shout at Larnell Harris. And they said, well, if you'd like to go to church, we go to the International Church and we would be happy to help you get there. So on Sunday, I was meeting with the church. I met my best friend, Priscilla Young. She was the most wonderful. She'd been living there about 6 months in Moscow with international teams and teaching at Moscow High Party School. I met wonderful people. God moved so miraculously. It was such a great time, such an opportunity to see how the Lord was moving. And my university asked me to give monthly lectures on Christianity and why I had faith. And so every month I would have a big auditorium full of kids, university kids, that I was able to tell my testimony, tell the evidence for God, and I even was able to show Campus Crusade's Jesus film in Russian. So I met a lot of wonderful people, had amazing experiences. My students were beautiful. Everything went really well. I was hungry sometimes, but most of the time everything went really well. And so one day I was going to the cafeteria because, part of my contract was to have a hot meal at one meal a day. And so I went in to get my hot meal and the cafeteria ladies were shouting at me. And I didn't speak any Russian now. I was scheduled to start my Russian classes. But, this was maybe 2.5 weeks into the semester. I didn't know what they were saying. And they believed, I think, that because I didn't speak Russian, if they shouted it at me, then I would miraculously be able to hear. And so I'm standing there and I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying. And a young girl came up to me, very pretty, very sweet. And she said, excuse me, can I help you translate something? And I said, oh my word, that would be fantastic. I cannot understand what they're saying and they keep shouting at me. And she said, yeah, let me ask them. And she goes, they want to know if you would like to have this compote, which is a hot drink, or would you rather have hot tea to drink? That was the big question. So I told them what I wanted with her help. And so I sat down and I said, wait, thank you so much. And she goes, are you the new American instructor? And I said, yes, I am. I am. And she goes, I wanted to take your class in English, but they said no, that it was packed and it had to be English majors. And I'm majoring in computer science. And I said, what's your name? And she said, my name is Olga. And I go, Olga, I warmly welcome you to attend my English classes. Let me handle the department. Let me get everything. You just show up. Here's my class schedule. And I wrote it down for her. And I said, you are welcome to attend my class. But you'll have to do the homework just like everybody else. And you'll have to participate just like everybody else. But I would be honored if you would be in my class. And so Olga said, I will come. And so I made arrangements with the university and explained that I would like to have this girl in my classroom. And she was wonderful. And to get more English practice, she would spend time with me and she would take me around Moscow, and she would spend time with me in the classroom and outside of the classroom and at the prophylactory. And she was really helpful. And she was my cultural interpreter, my language interpreter, but also my cultural interpreter. And I fell madly in love with her. And after several months of us talking and her asking me about my faith, Olga became the first person that I led to Christ. in Moscow. And she was gloriously saved. Actually, she didn't need me to lead her to Christ. She was already ready. The Lord had already prepared her heart. Her grandmother used to say to her when she would tuck her in at night, Olga, do not believe the communists. There is a God and he is real. And she knew that her grandmother had real faith in God and that God was real. So Olga became this dynamic, on-fire Christian. She'd have Bible studies in her dormitory, and I'm still good friends with Olga today. She's married with 3 beautiful children. She's amazing, godly woman. If you're watching, Olga, I love you and miss you. Oh, but it was such a time. Billy Graham and Association came, and I got to meet Billy Graham and Johnny Erickson Tata. They hosted her for dealing with people who were challenged and had disabilities, and so I was her host. Took her around and did everything that she needed me to do. It was such a privilege to meet her. I took a bunch of my students to go to the Billy Graham crusade, and so many of them came to Christ hearing the clear gospel message preached under the anointing of Billy Graham. And I'm not going to end it, but I do want to tell you something that God did great. I made that prophylactory mine. I taped up all of the cockroach places. I put contact paper up anywhere my body was going to be touching. I made it clean. I made it comfortable, warm, and cozy. But miraculously, after several months of being in Moscow, a friend of mine, Cindy LeClaire, had told me about some friends of hers who were trying to rent their apartment. And I went to look at it, and it was a beautiful apartment. It was clean, and it was in a good location, because I can't host students in the prophylactory. I couldn't have them for tea or have them for lunch and have those meaningful and important conversations about Jesus Christ that I long to have. And so I ended up renting an apartment from a wonderful Christian couple, Russian Baptist, Russian couple. And I am friends with their daughter today, Tanya Rahuba. Tanya and Sergey are part of the Slavic Gospel Association ministry. And so Tanya Rahuba and I are still really good friends. But that apartment, the Lord provided through her parents, was so... You just think about all the years that they prayed and were, honest and pure before God in that apartment. And then I reaped all of the harvest of that because I had Christian meetings there. I had students come in for Bible studies. I would host people for meals. If Christians were coming through Moscow, they could stay with me. It was just a wonderful place of refuge, and it was exactly the opposite of the prophylactory. So I went telling the Lord, I'm willing to stay in that prophylactory, cockroaches, filth, loud noise, nastiness and all. I'm willing to do it. And the Lord provided for me a place exceedingly and abundantly above and beyond anything that I could think or ask or even hope for. It was a beautiful, lovely apartment in a quiet neighborhood. So many good relationships. Priscilla and little Olga and Tanya and Sergey Rahuba and Cindy LeClaire. And oh, it was such an amazing time. I saw God move in such powerful ways. How he protected me, how he protected others, his watch care and his performance of his word. It was as if all of those years of praying for Russia and traveling in 86 and 88, I was watching as the seeds were coming to fruition. The Lord moved mightily. I ended up living in Moscow for 3 years. I returned to the States in 1993. And then I was married in 1994. But there was a lot God was doing in my life. And I met my very best friend. It was just an amazing time. And people like Daniel and Anna Ritzman, who worked for the Swiss Embassy, strong evangelical Christians that would use their resources to care for people like me. Anna Ritzman became my very best friend. Still is. So God did so many things in 1991. I'm so glad I went. I'm so glad I obeyed him. I would have missed out on a lot of opportunities to see God move. And that's the thing, isn't it? I know that Chris Britton posted something beautiful on Facebook today, that God calls us, and it's our duty to go. He doesn't always promise that we're going to come back. He doesn't promise that we're going to live. He doesn't promise that it's going to be a good experience. All we have to do is be obedient to him and follow whatever he calls us to do. And in that spirit, he moves and works, and he provides us with everything that we need. I'm so glad I went to Moscow, fall 1991. Thank you so much for letting me share these stories. They encourage my heart because it's such a clear reminder that our God does not fail. He does not abandon us. He does not fail us. He is always present, always with us in the most difficult of circumstances. Our responsibility is to hang on tight to him. He's a great provider, and he is faithful. That's not just an expression, it's the truth. Well, that has been Truth Matters with Terry McCarthy. Sorry I started crying. It's just, the floods of memories, just all of the memories come forward about what God did. Mighty move of the Spirit of the Lord. I'm so glad I feel honored that I had the opportunity to observe it and to be a part of it. Woo, deep cleansing breath. Okay, so this has been Vlog Friday. Thank you so much for joining me. I love you so much, and I'm so grateful for the subscriptions. Thank you for subscribing below. Thank you for your wonderful comments. Any thumbs up. Oh, I pray for the Lord to move across our globe, that he will give us one more chance. And by his Spirit, he will move on every tongue and every tribe and every nation. And that the human race has yet to see all that God is going to do before the return of Christ. That's my hope and my prayer. Okay. Love you. Thank you. Thanks for joining in. I'll see you next week for Vlog Friday. Bye.